It's 8 o'clock. This is the UK Tonight. Coming up, the children filming themselves torturing and killing animals and then sharing the videos on WhatsApp. Sky News has accessed the groups where children armed with catapults, some of them primary school age, have exchanged hundreds of photos and videos. The RSPCA has called the findings horrendous. Another charity says it has seen an exponential rise in injured birds. I'll speak to our correspondent who uncovered all of this, Amelia Harper, and a behavioural psychologist to explore the reasons for this disturbing new trend. Also tonight, claims the government's plans to tackle extremism could create even more division. Protest groups say they'll be vilified when ministers publish a new definition of extremism tomorrow. And even Conservative MPs have accused the government of trying to police people's thoughts. Plus, the American icon that's thriving in the UK, the new study that reveals the giant redwood might actually prefer life here rather than in its native California. And from queen of screen to multi-million-dollar business boss, I'll be speaking to Oscar-winning actress Gwyneth Paltrow about meditation, social media and that candle.
We just thought it would be kind of punk rock and funny, and having no idea it would become the viral candle that it did.
Well, that's come and much more on the UK Tonight. Well, we start tonight with a shocking rise in animal cruelty amongst children, some of them still in primary school. Sky News has gained access to groups on WhatsApp where children armed with catapults are torturing and killing animals and then sharing pictures and videos with hundreds of others. One animal rescue charity told us that they've seen an exponential rise in the number of birds injured with catapults. The RSPCA says that these findings are horrendous. We should warn you that this report coming up from our correspondent Amelia Harper does contain images of dead and injured animals, which many of you will find distressing.
Darkness has fallen. This, the setting for an execution. A bird singled out, about to be shot by children. The impact of the fall minor compared to the incoming kick. And this is the weapon of choice, a catapult. The victim this time, a squirrel. Sky News has uncovered a UK-wide network of animal shooting and torture carried out by children using catapults. Filming and photographing their kills, this material is shared on WhatsApp against their terms of use. An investigation has uncovered 11 catapult groups on the app with nearly 500 members like this one.
We're seeing more and more injured animals being reported to us that have been hit by a catapult. You can go and buy a catapult very easily and use it to target animals, which is illegal, and offences will be committed.
And injured animals end up here. The Swan Sanctuary, which rescues waterfowl, has 20 birds, all with catapult injuries in their hospital pens.
Most of the injuries are head injuries, neck injuries, pure kill shots. They're there to try and kill these animals. Fractures to the facial areas, eyes exploding, windpipes bursting. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've gone.
Causing unnecessary suffering to an animal is illegal. But when it comes to catapults, there's a gap in the law. People can buy them, carry them, and here they're being used to kill. The Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981 is the relevant legislation protecting wildlife in England and Wales, but catapults aren't covered anywhere under those laws. Henry Smith is part of a group of MPs working to lift animal welfare standards.
Government and Parliament should look to legislate in terms of the sale of catapults, and also for those who use catapults as a weapon to inflict injury and suffering, that there is a criminal sanction to that.
Big Canadian goose, dead as a dodo.
Documented on WhatsApp, this rabbit just another victim of an emerging trend, where catapults are used by children to kill. Calls have been made to tighten the laws. The question is, will it stop them? Amelia Harper, Sky News.
Well, Amelia's with me now. And Amelia, that is so distressing, but it's a really important report. You've had to sit through all of that footage.
Yeah.
You know, that's just a tiny fraction of what you've had to sit through. 500 members in one group, and you've been looking at other groups as well. Is there enough here to call this a trend?
This is absolutely an emerging trend, and as we saw in my report there, that's very much been backed up by the RSPCA and by the Swan Sanctuary, which has seen an exponential rise, they say, in birds in their care with catapult injuries. This is fundamentally a UK-wide network of animal shooting and torture perpetrated by children and teenagers, and they are filming and photographing their kills and sharing it on these WhatsApp groups. It's really abhorrent, the footage that we've had to look through.
And what's the sense that you're getting from the groups as to why they're doing this?
This is for fun. There is no legal explanation for why they are killing in this manner. Having showed some of this footage to Jeff Edmond, the RSPCA's lead wildlife officer, you know, his comment is, this is for sport. That is how he sees it. That is how I have seen it, having viewed over 350 pieces of material. And that was just since I became aware of this. So there will be more prior to when we started investigating this.
Because it's growing so quickly, it's only now that charities are finding out about it, and the authorities. What's been the response to this emerging trend and to your report as well?
Well, we've had a lot of feedback on it. People, you know, understandably quite outraged at what we've uncovered. The RSPCA has been very interested in what we have had to expose. And what's interesting is they are now also having conversations with police forces. And one of Jeff's comments was, it's interesting you've approached us about this to be a part of this piece, because we are now starting to see, for example, Essex Police, the Metropolitan Police, having conversations with us about potential crimes that have been committed that they've come across with catapults.
OK, Amelia, thank you. I'm going to bring in behavioural psychologist now, Jo Hemmings, to talk about this. Jo, really good of you to join us on the UK tonight. You'll be just as shocked and appalled as we all are watching what's going on in these WhatsApp groups. Children, some of them primary school age. I've just been asking Amelia there what she thinks the sort of motivation is behind it. What light can you shed on that?
It's massively distressing, isn't it? It's really shocking. We're an animal-loving country, and we're seeing things like this. I was just devastated watching it. I've never seen anything like it. Now, the fact that they are big WhatsApp groups, look, I think we've got to get it clear that, of course, it's animal cruelty, but it's not coming from a place where, let's say, a lot of serial killers or murderers, you look back in their childhoods, they were very cruel to animals. It's not coming from a place of cruelty. It's coming from a place of influence. So perpetrators are deliberately influencing young children to almost become tribal. It's like groupthink. So you give up any of your moral ideas or ethics in order to be part of this group. You're showing off. You're comparing, you know, your kills with each other, and it's awful. These young kids are being brought into this disassociation. They're disassociating the cruelty they're doing, giving it up for the sake of belonging to a group which is highly influencing them at a very impressionable age.
Jo, it's quite interesting what you say there about, you know, this isn't the next generation of those that go on to commit serious offences like murders. I mean, these are children, and children instinctively love animals, and it's this group mentality. And we see it a lot on social media. This is going on private chat groups.
Well, they're overriding the instincts, aren't they? They're overriding the instincts of young children. Now, for anybody who thinks their child might be on a group like that, the first thing I would say to parents is, lots of kids have pets, whether it's a dog or a cat or a hamster. Just say to them, can you imagine Freddie, Fido, whatever he's called, being hit by a ball bearing, being injured? And they immediately will click back into, no, that would be devastating. They have
Why is there this disconnect then? Because, you know, I don't know many children that would do that and find it funny, but it seems that once they get on these groups and they see others doing it, they become slightly distanced from it, perhaps. I'm just interested in that and why that's happening and how it happens.
Well, that's the disassociation. So they're no longer actually thinking about what they're actually doing, what their behaviour is. They have folded into, if you like, this group thing. Someone up there is a perpetrator. Someone is deliberately starting this, who will be older, who's bringing younger children in for their entertainment. And kids are being lured in because they can compare and contrast. You know, they feel tribal. They feel like they're belonging to something, and they've now almost stepped aside from what actually their behaviour really means. And it's awful. And it's shocking on TikTok. It's shocking on social media. It's actually almost worse on WhatsApp because they're drawn into something that
there's no space to call them out. It's a closed shop, isn't it?
Yeah,
they're
it's a
all
closed shop,
agreeing
exactly.
that it's okay. Nobody's picking up on something on social media and going, that is not good.
Yeah, and I think you've got to say to children, you've got to show them this. Perhaps not show them every detail if they're young, but ask them how they would feel if they had a pet and this was happening. It's almost like shocking them into the reality of what's going on.
Jo, what are the effects of this? Because, you know, if some of these kids were caught by their parents, you like to think they would stop. I mean, you know, who knows what's going on in a lot of these families where the children, you know, are doing this. But I'm just wondering, what happens beyond this? Where can it lead to if it's not stopped?
Look, unless they've got genuine psychopathic or sociopathic tendencies, it will stop. But what it will leave them with, and if you talk to any adult who's ever been cruel to an animal for whatever reason, generally, unless they are sociopathic, will have huge amounts of residual guilt, shame. They'll remember this. Kids remember that sort of cruelty to animals for the rest of their lives. So it's really appalling what they're doing to these young children who will not be able to forget when they realise what has been going on and how they've been influenced. It's
a problem, but just a final quick one, because some people will be watching this and going, this is nothing new. Kids with catapults have been shooting at birds and squirrels for years. Explain why this is different, if you could.
Look, I think, yeah, kids would climb trees. They'd kind of, you know, it would be a bit of fun. They probably weren't really thinking about it. This is organised cruelty. I mean, there isn't any other word for it. And so they're bringing kids in who wouldn't even think about doing that sort of thing, and then getting them to share their stories and compare and compete with other kids. It's totally different from the running around in the woods, perhaps, you know, harming an animal just because you're young and reckless and don't know better. This is quite deep organisational activity, and that makes it so shocking.
Yeah, Jo Hemmings, thank you so much for your contribution on the programme tonight. Jo Hemmings, their behavioural psychologist. Now, Rishi Sunak is resisting calls to return £10 million to the donor who he accepts made racist remarks about Diane Abbott. Frank Hester reportedly says Ms Abbott made him hate all black women. The Prime Minister says his apology should be accepted. Meanwhile, Ms Abbott has criticised the Speaker of the House of Commons after she stood up to ask a question at PMQs where this matter was being discussed 46 times, but wasn't selected. Our Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, has this report.
A Prime Minister having a bad week that's about to get worse.
Will you give the money back, Prime Minister?
Dogged by this row since Monday, the Prime Minister took a day to condemn offensive remarks from his biggest donor about former Labour MP Diane Abbott as racist. His party divided and increasingly despairing at his leadership.
Is the Prime Minister proud to be bankrolled by someone using racist and misogynist language when he says the member for Hackney North and Stoke Newington makes you want to hate all black women?
The comments were wrong, they were racist. He has rightly apologised for them, and that remorse should be accepted.
Rishi Sunak eager to forgive, but the opposition not willing to forget.
What racist, woman-hating threat of violence would he have to make before the Prime Minister plucked up the courage to hand back the £10 million that he's taken from him?
As I said, the gentleman apologised genuinely for his comments, and that remorse should be accepted.
Later, the Prime Minister went further still, suggesting he's happy to have Mr Hester's support.
Will he reimburse him, yes or no?
No, Mr Speaker, and I'm pleased that The gentleman is supporting a party that represents one of the most diverse governments in this country's history.
The woman at the heart of this story tried and tried and tried to have her say in the Commons, rising 46 times through PMQs, trying to get her own question, but not picked by Speaker Lindsay Hoyle. She's accused him of failing democracy. She did get a visit from her former party leader. Miss Abbott said she asked to have the Labour whip restored, but witnesses tell me he simply dodged the question.
It's a time for family. It's a time for friends.
Frank Hester is the Conservative Party's biggest ever donor. He's given £10 million to the Tories in the last year, but the party he's funded is now deeply divided about his offensive comments. Minutes after Rishi Sunak refused to hand back Mr Hester's cash, the Scottish Conservatives broke with their leader, releasing a statement demanding the party carefully review the donations. And even loyal MPs are only offering the faintest praise for the PM.
Do you really, genuinely, in your heart of heart, think that there's a guy who can turn around a 26-point poll deficit?
Well, I think the Prime Minister's got far better at PMQs in recent weeks.
And not willing to repeat the Prime Minister's own words.
Do you think Frank Hester's remorse should be accepted?
I think, well, I don't know enough about the issue personally, but in the sense that, in the sense, I don't know the context of it, but what he said was racist and what he said was wrong.
I've just come from talking to lots of Tory MPs. One said that the state of the Conservative Party was a bin fire, and most others seem to agree with that assessment. They are worried about the performance of the Prime Minister. He's got nothing left in the tank, said one person Rishi Sunak appointed to his cabinet. But they just don't agree on what to do next. It's 12 days since Rishi Sunak stood in Downing Street and condemned extremism. Tomorrow, a controversial new strategy to tackle it. But the Prime Minister has been learning the hard way that where you draw the line and what to do when it's crossed is far from easy. Sam Coates, Sky News, Westminster.
The government has been warned by campaigners, faith leaders and even its own MPs that its plans to tackle extremism could create even more division in the UK. Muslim groups say they'll be vilified when ministers publish a new definition of extremism tomorrow. And the government has been told to target the specific groups that foster terrorism, with concern about the impact of tomorrow's announcement on free speech. Our Home editor, Jason Farrell, has this next report.
A protest in Birmingham, organised by Shakil Afsar, a vocal activist.
It will be free from the river to the sea.
But will his views and actions fall foul of the new definition of extremism?
This is only being passed to silence us and to put a zip on our mouth and say what you are saying is not acceptable, it won't be entertained. And that's wrong. This is not the democratic country that I grew up in. You could take a walk down the streets in many areas and every single thing that we have said and done is agreed by many, many thousands of British citizens.
He made headlines 5 years ago when a protest exclusion zone was set up around a Birmingham primary school, after Shakil led a campaign against inclusion of LGBT literature. He's re-emerged organising pro-Palestinian marches.
Rishi Sunak, you are most definitely a waste man.
Shakil says he doesn't support what Hamas did on October the 7th, but his views and actions might still be considered extremist. And this chant, for example, anti-Semitic.
Surely, do the Palestinians not have a right to arm themselves and stop this tyranny and this genocide that is happening?
A lot of people say, when you chant from the river to the sea, you're saying, stop that genocide over there, but let's annihilate another population over here.
I believe that the Palestinians and the Palestinian resistance movement has a right to defend themselves.
But does that mean...
and arm themselves to defend themselves as per international law.
Up to what? Up to which geographical location?
Well,
between the river and the sea?
Up to between the river and the sea.
So therefore, where do the Israelis live? Where do the
Israelis
live? That's the main
I'm going to
point.
answer the question.
Okay.
Where the Israelis live is from the river to the sea in a democratic country where they all live peacefully.
Michael Gove says pro-Palestinian events have been organised by extremist groups, and it will be one of the challenges of this definition to decide who falls under it.
This definition does not ban extremism. What it bans is the government giving money or platforms to extremists. I think that's very important to make that distinction. You can still have freedom of thought on this basis, but I think what's quite clear is that we don't want extremist groups to be empowered by government. We want them as far away in the margins of life as possible.
Abdullah represents one group which fears it will be deemed extremist, called MEND. They oppose the government's anti-radicalisation programme and accuse them of Islamophobia. They also help train institutions about Islamophobia.
People who engage with the Muslim community, whether it be in hospitals or the police or any other organisations, universities, things like this, they reach out to us saying, listen, you have some really good material. We'd like you to kind of train our staff, with, to talk to us about these issues.
Do you think you'll still be allowed to train the police or medical staff in Islamophobia if you're deemed to be extremist?
I think it's an old tactic, really, that if someone is against you, then you just put this label on them and then you don't have to engage with them.
The government says it's trying to identify all forms of extremism, including the far right. But Muslim groups fear this will disproportionately affect them. Jason Farrell, Sky News.
Well, Jason's with me in the studio now. And Jason, just watching that report, let's talk a little bit about what's happening tomorrow, this announcement, because there has been a new statement that's been put together by a number of Muslims groups all coming together ahead of what's happening tomorrow. What have they had to say? What are their concerns?
So this is a statement that was released this evening, and the groups are CAGE, Friends of Alaska, the Muslim Association of Britain, and the Muslim Engagement and Development MEND, which all are groups that believe that they might fall into this category of extremist. And what they're saying, really following on actually from what we've heard from the Archbishop of Canterbury, talking about the disproportionate effect that it would have on Muslim groups. But they say this proposed definition signals an attack on civil liberties by attacking law-abiding individuals, they say, and groups that oppose government policy by labelling them as extremists. In other words, you're going for us because we've called you Islamophobic or we've been against, for example, the Prevent scheme.
We don't know what that definition will be yet. It's going to be announced tomorrow. But what will it do? We know that there will be no criminalisation attached to it. So what's the point? It's worth reminding people as to why we're getting this new definition.
Yeah, it won't criminalise anybody. There are no new laws being brought in. But what it is, it's denying access to ministers, civil servants, denying access to central government funds, for example. And what these groups say is that when they're working on things like Islamophobia, they work with the police, they work with the NHS, they work with other groups. And the work that they do is to teach people about Islamophobia, be that in schools or elsewhere. So they say, if you delegitimise us, then there'll be more Islamophobia, fewer people will report it, there'll be more bullying in schools, that kind of thing. So that's what the pushback is going to be. But I think the government will say, oh, and by the way, a lot of these groups aren't funded anyway by the government. They're funded by communities, so they'll say they're being marginalised, those communities. But the government will say, look, there's been a lot of tension, there's been a lot of anti-Semitism, and they do not want to give platforms to or any legitimacy to groups that hold extremist views, and that's what this is about for the government.
Well, we wait for that new definition from the government that will be announced tomorrow. We'll have plenty of reaction to that here on Sky News for the moment. Jason, thank you. Jason Farrell there. Still to come here on the UK Tonight, we're going to talk about the anti-immigrant protests that are being hijacked by the far right, and we'll explore the consequences of that. Plus, my conversation with Oscar winner and Queen of Wellness, Gwyneth Paltrow. Stay tuned.
Michelle Sank won the Portrait category of the year, and Leah Mann won the Landscape category, and both are with us.
This was taken at the pavilion in Sea Point, an area where I grew up as a child, which I've returned to in the last couple of years to make work there. And what's extraordinary about this post-apartheid is the multiculturalism that is now there, and the fact that this pool has not changed at all in all these years, so quite remarkable.
This is a photo that I took on one night in the Isle of Skye, Scotland.
It's one of the most beautiful landscapes that I know. It's the Old Man of Storr, amazing rock formations. And I used some drones with lights attached to them to light up the landscape. In the background, you can see what actually looks like a sunrise. That's the moon. So about half an hour before I took this image, this huge blizzard blew through, and all the ice crystals in the air, they kind of refract the light in the same way that the atmosphere refracts the light during a sunrise. So it gave the moon this kind of brilliant orange glow.
I work very intuitively and very spontaneously, and something sparks a kind of awe in me when I'm working in this place. And I saw them sitting there and just asked if I could photograph them. So my relationship is very symbiotic. It's about me negotiating with them. There's an intimacy that I think comes through in my subjects with myself. And that's extremely important to me. That it's almost like an act of love when I see the image that I want to take.
Hello, welcome back. You're watching the UK Tonight. Here's what's on the way. I catch up with the Oscar-winning actress Gwyneth Paltrow to find out the inspiration behind her now infamous candle, and why the world's largest trees are thriving more in the UK than in their native Californian home. Now, before the break, we were discussing the government's plans for a new definition of extremism and the concerns over how it's responding to both the far right and Islamist groups. Well, Sky News analysis has found a sharp rise in anti-migrant protests, with experts warning that local issues are being hijacked by the far right to push a nationalist agenda. One place where demonstrations have been affected is RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire, from where our data and forensics correspondent Tom Cheshire reports.
This is a very local protest. The traffic thunders by RAF Scampton. People here have been campaigning for a year to stop the Home Office turning it into accommodation for 2,000 asylum seekers.
A year in now, pretty permanent setup, isn't it?
Yes. The locals, like Sarah, had to contend with another group turning up to hijack their cause. Outsiders, far-right nationalists.
The main group were sort of pretty far-right, and then there were people there that maybe weren't quite as aware of the situation that were supporting them.
Fights broke out and the police were called out regularly. Sarah says she and her husband were assaulted by men wearing balaclavas. Our analysis of new figures from advocacy group Hope Not Hate, shared exclusively with Sky News, shows how protests like these are becoming a new battleground for the far right.
There's been this big surge in anti-migrant protests like this one over the last year, but that contains multitudes. It can be legitimate political protests. There's also fears that it can be hijacked by right-wing groups.
The demonstration in RAF Scampton is just one of many across the UK. There are 275 anti-migrant events in 2023. 159 of those were visits, where people try and gain access to hotels where migrants are being held. 116 were demonstrations, a 13-fold increase on the year before. And that may reflect a rise in confidence on the hard right, perhaps because many of the themes they champion are becoming mainstream. If this idea of invasion sounds familiar, well, you may have heard it somewhere else before.
The British people deserve to know which party is serious about stopping the invasion on our southern coast.
The language of the far right swilling around the web, now making its way to Westminster, according to political scientists.
I don't think politicians anymore are, if you like, insulated from the language and some of the behaviour of the far right. I think they pick it up on social media, and they're willing to use some of the words that those groups, tend to bandy about, quite easily.
The question is what all that means in an election year. with the Conservative Party facing pressure from further right. National questions. But RAF Scampton is a reminder that all politics, even on the far right, is local. Tom Cheshire, Sky News, Lincolnshire.
Let's get a bit more on this story. Tom's with me in the studio now. And Tom, let's explore the tactics that are being used here, because they've changed over the years, and you've been seeing some of them in action.
Yeah, there has been that change. And I mean, the first thing to say, of course, it's not a far-right position to disagree with an asylum centre being built next door to you. It's not a far-right position to oppose immigration. It's Labour Party policy that immigration numbers should come down. But where it does become far-right is when there's talk of an ethnically homogenous UK, where you have organisation whose members have been jailed for, instances of hate crimes, racial harassment, even terrorism offences. That's the difference between those two. And when it comes to those tactics, that's the slight melding. So you get these visits where you go to where you get far-right groups, they'll go to asylum centres, so hotels that might have asylum seekers. And the idea of that is to go and film it, put it online, gain a following that way. The other way to do it is protest, things like, which we've seen more of in the last year. There's still more visits, but protests are really, really growing. And that's where you show up at a local site, no matter what group you are, and you say, well, the locals are concerned about this. We're going to show up with our agenda, which probably goes a bit further, which is more extreme, and say, look, here's a local concern, but this is also something we're concerned by, and perhaps we can get people won't know they're part of this, perhaps, or perhaps they'll be recruited to the cause. So I think that's the worry with those sorts of things, that it goes beyond sort of, a reasonable view to something that actually might lead people down a road to radicalisation, to extremism we've been hearing a lot about today, and to criminal offences too.
And how concerning is this in an election year? How does this feed into the election cycle?
You've got different ways of doing it. For instance, Patriotic Alternative, who organise a lot of those protests, they're the ones on that screen there. And that rhetoric we talked about in the package, it does seem there's a bit more of osmosis between their sort of language and what we hear on the right wing rather than, say, the far right. But then they disagree within themselves. There was a big splinter cell within them. They've gone to form a political party to try and get registered by the Electoral Commission. So there's disagreement there. I think it's more in the mainstream parties. Does the Conservative see that threat, and does it see it from Reform, which is a more populist right party? There are all these gradations. I'm sorry, it's a bit technical, but it pulls people around, it pulls them along, and then eventually, the parties have to decide who they're going to appeal to. Are they going to tack back to the centre, or are they going to look to pick up votes in the right wing and further right than that?
Really interesting to get under the skin of it all. Thank you very much, Tom Cheshire there. Now, after the break, I'm going to be in conversation with a Hollywood star turned multi-million-dollar business boss, Gwyneth Paltrow. Stay tuned. welcome back to the UK Tonight. Now, Gwyneth Paltrow reached the very top of the acting profession, winning multiple awards, including the big one, an Oscar. And she's proving just as successful in her second act as the chief executive of a multi-million-dollar wellness empire. In a UK broadcast exclusive, I spoke to Gwyneth about her new meditation app, the dangers of smartphones and social media, and of course, I had to ask about that candle. Well, Gwyneth Paltrow, welcome to the UK Tonight. It's great to talk to you. Let's talk about wellness, because I feel in this current news climate, which is what we deal with day in and day out here on Sky News, we need to focus on wellness, and we need moments of space, which is the name of your new app, and it's all about meditation. Tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, it's exactly that. It's a really useful, very easy meditation app. I like to say it's for people who think they're too busy to meditate or their minds are too active to meditate. It focuses on an old tradition of eyes open meditation, which I actually didn't know existed until I really started getting involved with the app. So it makes it super easy and accessible, and I find it's changed my life for the better, for sure.
I might be your target market here as someone who's very busy, and lots of our viewers will be as well. The way you think about meditation is taking yourself off into a room by yourself, closing your eyes and taking 15 to 20 minutes. We lead busy lives. So talk to me about meditating with your eyes open. How does that work exactly?
So, first of all, an eyes closed meditation is also a great practice. But eyes open is very different. So what you essentially do, you're kind of led through a guided meditation where you start to kind of explore with a very softened gaze the space, the negative space around you, the positive space around you. And you're able to sit in a meeting and listen, but kind of get the benefits from meditation. There's also great walking meditations on the app, which I really love. Those have become my favorites. I love being able to walk and sort of pull in the softness and the centeredness that comes with, when you carve a few minutes out to meditate.
It sounds like tuning the world out a bit, which I think we could all do a bit of, because there's so much going on in the world at the moment. How do you deal with that? Because you live a busy life, you're exposed to all the same kind of news that we are, whether it be politics, wars in different parts of the world. It can get really overwhelming sometimes. How do you deal with that, and how does this feed into it?
Yeah, I think I personally try to limit my exposure to tons of news and tons of social media and media in general. I find that I'm just less anxious when I take in information at a slower pace. I'd rather read a newspaper than scroll through, a platform that's incredibly anxiety provoking. And I think it's important to focus, there's so much input now in all of our lives. I do think it's important to always return to the things that actually make us feel good, our relationships, conversation, laughing with people we love, good food, So those are the ways that I try to kind of remove myself from the madness that is the world these days.
Yeah, because the world's in the palm of your hand, isn't it? It's something we talk about a lot here in the UK, the smartphone, and the fact that you do have access to the world in the palm of your hand at all times, particularly children. That's something we've been talking about a lot here on the UK Tonight. Social media, children, at what age is it appropriate to have a smartphone? What are your views on that? Because children live in a different way to we did when we were their age. This is just their lives and what it will be in the future. So what are your thoughts on how they should cope with that and how we as adults should guide them through it?
I mean, I think we're still learning as parents, I think in the US as well, there's been talks of putting warning labels on smartphones for kids, there's a ton of research that it's incredibly detrimental, that especially girls who are kind of digitally native of that generation have a lot more anxiety than girls in generations before them. And, as a parent, I tried to keep my kids off of having a smartphone as long as possible. But then at a certain point, if they're the odd man out and their friends are building community on smartphone, you don't want them to be isolated. So I think when they were about 12, I capitulated and tried to stave off the social media platforms a little bit past that. Because I do think that it causes a high degree of anxiety, especially in our girls.
Yeah. On the one hand, you know, today's young people have never had it so good in terms of being encouraged to speak openly about mental health, and they have a society that has embraced wellness to a degree. That's the generation that will talk about it openly. The flip side, of course, is they're more exposed and overstimulated with the internet, social media, smartphones and technology. How do you balance it? Because it's not just the younger generation, is it? And, you know, you've amassed a massive social media following. It's part of your enterprise, part of your business. I think 8.5 million followers you have on Instagram. So how do you navigate that and the overuse of social media and the smartphone?
I find it really difficult, to be honest. Like I don't intuitively want to do it. I don't post. I don't like to read comments. Like I find it all like a bit of an overwhelming proposition. However, I do understand that it is this great way to connect with an audience and to share things that you're working on, or, you know, if to your point, if you're trying to build enterprise value, you have to have engagement from people and customers. So I think it's something that a lot of founders struggle with, how much to be on social media, share on social media. I find that it's just, for me, it's uncomfortable. Yeah. You know, like my team asks me every month to do an Ask Me Anything, and I sort of like have to really get up the...
But you're so open, Gwyneth. I feel like nothing's off limits with you. You do talk very openly to followers.
I think if you're going to do it, you have to do it. Like, I can't fake it. If I'm going to go on there, I'm going to be myself and I'm going to be honest. That's, you know, that's me, for better or worse. I always, I think I'm a very authentic person, you know, one way or the other. So, you know, that's my style.
Can I take you back to the very beginning? Because you talk about, obviously, being a founder and the social media platform being integral to your brand, Goop. And that's how you reach people now with businesses, right, isn't it? It's the way of working. Can we go back to the beginning? And when you first moved away from acting to enter this burgeoning industry of wellness, you were one of the early adopters. And when you first started your brand, a lot of eyebrows were raised. Let's face it, some people weren't very kind. And I just wonder what you think, looking back on that now, and whether you think, do you know what, I told you so.
Twist my mustache and have schadenfreude. You know, I think it's actually funny at this point, you know, when I look back and I think about how mean people were about, like, you know, a number of things. If we always just talked about things early. I think there is maybe a satisfaction to know that, you know, not to be glib, but just to know that I was onto something, my instincts were right. And I think it's reaffirming, you know, for myself and going forward, like, no, if I really believe in something and I think it's interesting and I think people might want to know about it, like, I'm happy to share about it.
And not to take yourself too seriously either, because there was that candle a few years ago, and it just spawned so many copycats. I don't know if you've seen Saltburn, the movie. This candle smells like Jacob Elordi's bathwater. You know, it became a thing, and that came from you not taking yourself too seriously. You know, just retell that story, how it came about, because I would have loved to have been in that meeting when you decided that's a product we're going to put to market.
Well, I have, you know, a very spicy sense of humor, which those who know me well know, and that candle was really about me being tired of women having shame around their bodies and a sort of very misogynistic framework that a lot of culture operates in. And so we just thought it would be kind of punk rock and funny, having no idea it would become the viral candle that it did. But yeah, we actually retired that candle now, but it's very funny to see the copycats. I love it.
Well, my final question, Gwyneth, and I'd kick myself if I didn't ask it. What would it take to get Gwyneth Paltrow back as part of a major film production. There are so many great roles for women of our age now. What would tempt you back, or are you officially retired?
I never say never. You know, I'm about to embark on a different phase of life. My son is going to university in the fall. So, you know, things can shift and change. Obviously, like with my job as CEO at Goop, it takes up all of my time. But, you know, who knows? I mean, I'm not actively pursuing it. I am very busy with my day job, but I've learned enough not to say never.
Never say never. Well, Gwyneth, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you for talking to us about your meditation at moments of space. It's something we can all get on board with in this busy life. And as the mother of a toddler, I don't get much time to close my eyes, so meditating with my eyes open might be the only option for me.
Absolutely. You can push your toddler on the swing and be meditating.
I love it. I'm all for it. Gwyneth, good to meet you, and thank you so much for joining us on the UK Tonight. Gwyneth Paltrow, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Also to come here on the UK Tonight, another American icon. Stay tuned for the news that one of them is thriving here in the UK, and we'll have more on the retirement of a Welsh rugby great.
There's always more to the news than a headline. We want to discover, to delve a little deeper, to find out what's really going on. Explanation, analysis, the people at the heart of every story. I'm Neil Patterson, and this is the Sky News Daily Podcast. Alex Crawford joining us now from Ukraine.
Their personal possessions are all scattered around the place.
Our economics and data editor, Ed Conway, try and make sense of the big numbers for us.
Things can change incredibly quickly, and that's what they have done.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better. Available wherever you get your podcasts.
I'm Mark Stone, and I'm Sky's correspondent based here in Washington, D.C.
Over street!
Well, the plan seems to be to head to the police station where the policeman who fired the shots was based.
And everything, you know, his memories is all gone.
I've witnessed the remarkable passion for politics here, but the anger too.
We have to get Trump out of the White House.
I'm playing devil's advocate.
You've got your political agenda.
No, it's honestly...
God love you.
And beyond the United States, I report from around the world. This is a town that is effectively encircled by the Russians. We take you to the heart of stories that shape our planet.
Akbar!
Yeah, I can hear now quite a few explosions in the distance here in Jerusalem. What do you think of ISIS?
Everybody here, they know the truth of ISIS.
Hello, welcome back to the UK Tonight. Coming up, why the world's largest trees are thriving more in the UK in comparison to their native California. That report on the way. But first, Teddy's here with the sport. And Teddy, some surprising news today. A legend of Welsh rugby making a big announcement. Tell us more.
Well, it feels like it's been a staple for a long time of rugby union Wales. George North, 6'4", 18 stone. He's described by Jonathan Davis, another Welsh legend today, as the Jonah Lumu of Welsh rugby. Second highest ever try scorer, and also a Lions star, as here's this wonderful try back in 2013 against Australia on the tour down under for the Lions. He's the second most capped player ever in Wales history. He'll get third 121st cap at the weekend. He was the youngest of 50 caps. He was the youngest player in the world at the age of 28 to have 100 caps. but he's announced after being dropped last week for the heavy loss to France, he was recalled for the team, and then today comes out the announcement that it's going to be his last season. He's going to Provence in France to play. He said in November when he announced that decision that he was leaving Ospreys that he wasn't necessarily leaving Wales, but he is. And it feels like at the moment with Wales trying to avoid the wooden spoon on Saturday that it's a real transition time.
Yeah, does it feel in a sense like it's the end of an era for Welsh rugby?
I think it does, particularly in the last year. I mean, George North's relatively young, only 31 years of age, but he's been around for a long time, since the age of 18, scored a couple of tries in his debut. In the last year, had Alan Wynne-Jones, who's got the most caps. He's left. Justin Tipuric has left. Dan Biggar, the fly half, who's on the all-time cap list as well in the top 10, he's left. And for 4 Six Nations wins, a couple of Grand Slams, it really does feel that it's a big transitional period. They've had a very difficult time in the Six Nations. Warren Gatland's gone back, but certainly at the moment, he's yet to find that winning recipe. He's going to have to do it with new players, it seems.
And that announcement coming, as you said, in the middle of the Six Nations. Just worth reminding people where Wales sit. And you mentioned that wooden spoon. What have they got to do to avoid it?
Yeah, historically, it's a very unusual position for Wales. Not since 2003 have they finished bottom of the pile, but Italy have been resurgent. They almost beat England. They did beat Scotland last week, which means that Wales have to have a bonus point win in Cardiff in George North's final appearance to make sure that it's Italy finished bottom again. So it's a big twist on that as Ireland and England go for the Six Nations title. That's the rugby. Meanwhile, it's a busy night of football. In the Premier League, we've got a game and a couple in the Champions League as well.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality. Getting more people more active. Live life with Vitality.
Every week across the UK, 85% of school-age students take part in approximately an hour of sport a week. Organised grassroots sport has lower numbers, but it translates to millions of girls and boys between the age of 7 and 20 playing sport. But there is a problem. A big problem.
Without doubt, every year we seem to be seeing more and more young people coming through with significant knee injuries, and primarily we're talking about ACL ruptures. The numbers are staggering and extremely worrying. For every one person that was having an ACL reconstruction in the late 90s, there's now 29 children having those surgeries. So the number of injuries is without a doubt
29-fold.
Yeah.
Evidence of a problem comes from multiple sources. Other surgeons and doctors are waving a warning flag.
We increased by 29 folds amount of operation. Devastating injuries that can cause complete change of the life trajectory and early risk of arthritis. People are committing to 1 or 2 sports at most at the moment, if they are going to be part of the local community. And they spend less time developing other skills that will be naturally developed when they are participating in multiple sports.
This Sky News Sports Bulletin is brought to you by Vitality.
Now, we like to leave you with something weird or wonderful on the UK tonight. And a new study has revealed that an American icon might actually prefer life here in the UK. Giant redwoods have been growing in the UK for around 160 years now. And there are many, many more of them here. Around 80,000 remain in California. In the UK, though, there are 500,000. Our science correspondent Thomas Moore has this report.
The giant sequoia, the world's largest tree. Originally from California, but now it seems perfectly at home in Britain. Scientists have counted up to 500,000 around the country. That's 6 times as many as there are left in the forests of the Sierra Nevada mountains. In the US, they're threatened by drought and extreme wildfires. Here, the conditions are just right, even though our climate is so different. UK and California, you'd think 2 completely different climates.
Well, you would do, but remember California maybe 300 years ago, quite a different environment than it is now. Much cooler, much wetter, much more humid. And that's what we've got here. We have those conditions here in the UK.
Which is why they're doing so well here.
It's one reason why they're doing so well. I think the other reason is that taking them out of their native range means that the competition and pests are no longer problematic for the species.
The tallest sequoia, or giant redwood, that the researchers found was just under 55 metres, far smaller than the 80-metre giants in the US. But British specimens are growing around 70 centimetres a year, absorbing 160 kilograms of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. That's twice the amount of a native oak tree. The first sequoias were planted in Britain a little under 200 years ago, but that makes them mere babies compared to their Californian cousins. There, the giants are up to 3,000 years old, with trunks so wide they've been tunnelled out to drive a car through.
You can see the top just about from this bit.
It's unlikely that the British sequoias will grow that big, but they could prove a vital safety net for the species. Threatened with extinction in California, seeds from British trees that were brought here by the Victorians could one day be transplanted back across the Atlantic, saving the majestic giants of the forest. Thomas Moore, Sky News at Wakehurst Gardens in Sussex.
Right, now let's take a quick look at the weather.
Warm memories wherever you go. The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
Well, the rest of the week will stay unsettled with localised flooding, but southwesterly winds are going to make it very mild. There'll be a fine evening for many of us, but you can expect some outbreaks of rain from the south of Ireland through to central Britain, mostly Wales and the southern Irish counties. The north of Scotland can expect showers. Northern Ireland, the north of Ireland and the Scottish border region will turn wet overnight, while the south of Ireland and Wales will see rain clearing to a scattering of locally heavy showers. Elsewhere, mostly fine. Showers over north of Scotland largely fading and gales easing. It will be mild.
The weather, sponsored by Qatar Airways.
That's all from the UK tonight. You can catch up on the highlights on our webpage. Just scan the QR code on your screen. You can share your thoughts with us as well. Gillian Joseph in the hot seat tomorrow. Next up is Yelda Hakeem with The World.